Now, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says that any Western troops deployed to Ukraine would be legitimate targets for Moscow to attack. Putin was speaking at a day after French President Emmanuel Macron said 26 countries had pledged to provide post-war security guarantees to Ukraine, including a possible international force on land, sea and in the air in the event of a peace deal. Now, his comments drew focus on how the conflict and what it means for Russia if other troops joined the battlefield. Let's have a listen.
Regarding potential foreign military contingents in Ukraine, it is one of those root causes behind drawing Ukraine into NATO. Therefore, if some troops appear there, especially now, during military operations, we proceed from the fact that these will be legitimate targets for destruction.
We can get more on this from DW's Russia analyst, Konstantin Eggert. Good to see you, Konstantin. So President Putin just called Western troops legitimate targets. Is that a real threat from him?
No, it is bluster. Putin knows very well that, first of all, there are no troops on the ground now, and it doesn't look like there will be any of them in the foreseeable future. Secondly, he knows that if those troops are really there and he strikes them, there's going to be a massive, massive backlash in the West, and this is something he doesn't want. And thirdly, he lied during this very short fragment that you played. No one was pulling Ukraine into NATO. Ukraine wanted to join NATO, give or take, more or less, since the Bucharest NATO summit in 2008. That's a long time ago. So, as always, it's a combination of bluster and untruths in Putin's remarks.
Do you think that Russia actually fears the concept of NATO boots on the ground, or is this more about keeping Ukraine isolated and vulnerable?
Both, Christine. They don't want NATO troops on the ground because that will mean essentially Ukraine becoming a no-go area for the Russians. And in this respect, it will definitely strengthen Ukraine's position, show that Ukraine is essentially, officially, unofficially, doesn't matter, part of the Western world. So yes, he understands that if the West is there, that is already a political, if not a full military defeat for him. And yes, he fears such development. And so far, the West was basically hesitant to provide such support for Ukraine. But we'll see how it will work out in the future. Although, personally, I do not think it will happen anytime soon, because I do not think that we're looking towards any kind of peace deal in the near future.
Okay, stand by, Konstantin, because I want to introduce this for us. The Russian army seems to be succeeding in advancing further into Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine's President Zelensky has warned of a new Russian offensive. Now, the Russians are apparently being aided by a new tactic of infiltration. Large tank brigades are a thing of the past, and today other means are required. Let's take a look.
War on bikes? This tactic is how the Russians are trying to gain ground, according to a video from the Russian news agency TASS. Small groups of soldiers, or even lone fighters, are taking over mile after mile on bikes, or even on foot. First, we clear the forest near the settlements, says the man in another video from the Russian Ministry of Defense. The commander, he says, guides us with the little bird and tells us who is where and how many. In army jargon, little birds refers to drones used for intelligence gathering or destroying targets. 3.5 years after the start of the war in Ukraine, it is impossible to imagine the conflict without them. Large convoys of heavy tanks, on the other hand, are said to be rare now. This is in contrast to the beginning of the war in February 2022, when images of massive Russian troop movements with heavy military equipment were seen.
At that time, the Ukrainians understood how they had to fight back. With the help of other countries, they began to use drones and invested heavily in them. The Russians also recognized this and developed their own drones. A kind of competition began. Whose drones are better?
Those tank convoys have now shrunk to a maximum of 10 armoured vehicles. Today, they are only used as a means of transport. However, they are no longer used in combat. Local attacks are now carried out by small groups of soldiers, usually 2 to 4. Their main advantage is their invisibility. At night, they often wear special coats that mask their body temperature, because the reconnaissance drones are equipped with thermal imaging cameras.
Experts call this tactic infiltration. It is used in several places along the front and is considered successful by the Russians. Propaganda reports from recent months are also supposed to prove this. Several commanders are reporting suspected territorial gains. The infiltration tactic is said to be successful, primarily because, according to experts, the front line is no longer clearly marked.
There is no sharp, clear line. There is no continuous fortification strip. Instead, there are large gaps. Today's front line is a defensive zone consisting of individual fortifications, individual firing ranges, often in private homes. The most important thing in this zone is not fire control, but visual control.
This means that Ukrainian drones control the front line from the air. Experts say that where this is not guaranteed, the Russians are able to make breakthroughs with their infiltration tactics.
So this is new, Konstantin, Russian soldiers rolling in on bikes. Would you say we're looking at a smart guerrilla tactic, or perhaps is this a sign that the Russian army is stretched thin?
First of all, Christine, let's remember this material that we've seen from the Russian side is provided by the state news agency TASS and the Russian Ministry of Defense. So it's a fair presumption that this is an attempt to impact psychologically the battlefield, but it is essentially war propaganda. Secondly, I don't know whether the Russians will have enough bikes for that, because if they are lost, there has to be quite a steady supply. And thirdly, we do know that today drone production is very cheap. There is ample video evidence, although I'm not a military expert per se, but it's very clear that there's ample visual evidence that now drones hunt individual soldiers. Yes, probably the mobility of people on bikes could provide for, could create more difficult conditions for those drones that hunt individual targets, like soldiers, like snipers, for example. But I do think that it is eventually going to be manageable. The leaps with which the drone technology develops now definitely indicate that this is that providing a countermeasures for this allegedly new Russian tactic will be probably a matter of weeks, probably months.
Right, so you seem to be suggesting this could be helpful, these bikes, in getting around the drones, or making it difficult for the drones. But is it clear if this infiltration tactic, as we're calling it, is actually translating into the military gaining ground? Are they making territorial gains with this strategy of the bikes?
First of all, I was suggesting that although maybe, we do not know, because the only thing we know is what the Russians are telling us. This is a successful tactic. Locally, it's just a tactic for the time being. I'm sure that Ukrainians will find countermeasures for that. Secondly, I do think that what we've seen only minimal gains by the Russians recently, so maybe it's not such a groundbreaking situation for them after all.
All right, that's DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert. Thanks very much, Konstantin.